Hello, and a warm welcome to Cicerone's latest Tune In Tuesday. I'm Amy Hodkin, and it's lovely to welcome you to this week's Camino special, focusing on the Camino del Norte in northern Spain. We are delighted to be joined by two Cicerone authors this event, who between them have written 4 guidebooks covering 6 different Camino routes and have collectively walked tens of thousands of miles of pilgrimage routes all over the world. I'm going to pass over to one of them, Sandy Brown, to lead this event as he has such a wealth of knowledge about Camino routes, as you're soon going to find out. But I'm going to be here to gather your questions and then pass them on to our guests to answer. So there's loads of ways to get in touch. You can put it as a comment on Facebook. If you're on the webinar in Zoom, there's a Q&A feature that you can use. You can send it as an email to us live@cicerone.co.uk or tweet it to us @Cicerone Press. So please use whatever works best for you, and we'll get through as many questions as we can. And if you do need to leave at any point, we will be uploading this onto YouTube and our website, so you can watch it at a later date. So leading this event is the author of our new 2-volume Camino Francés guidebook and map book, which launched earlier this year, and also the author of the guidebook to the Way of St. Francis. He has just submitted his manuscripts for his upcoming guides to the Via Francigena, covering the route from Lausanne to Rome. His talents also extended beyond writing guidebooks as a community activist, long-distance walker, and ordained minister from Seattle, Washington, who records his pilgrim adventures on his popular blog, www.caminoist.org. He is a close partner of Cicerone and runs the Cicerone Camino Facebook page, and we'll be hosting our future Camino live events. So it is an absolute delight for me to pass on and welcome the Reverend Sandy Brown. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amy. And it's really a joy to be able to be here today and talk with people about one of my favorite pilgrimage routes. And the Camino del Norte is one of the great pilgrimages of the Camino de Santiago. And it goes along the coast in northern Spain and provides really a very unique opportunity to see what Spain is all about. Now, today's talk is going to be in webinar format, which means that our presenter will present about the Camino del Norte, and then we will go into a time of questions. I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll also take questions from the audience participants. So we're really looking forward to this format as a way to learn about this majestic Camino walk. And our guest for today is Dave Whitson, who is really one of the most expert people on this walk because he's written one of the leading guidebooks for it, and also because he's walked it so many times. Dave is a high school teacher in Portland, Oregon, and he walked the Camino de Santiago first in 2002. And then the Camino del Norte first in 2008. So it's a pleasure to introduce Dave Whitson today. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Sandy.
Yeah, and you're coming to us today from the west coast of the United States, I understand. Maybe just a couple hundred miles from where I am too. And Dave, thank you for joining us today. And I want to start off by just asking you, how did you get into pilgrimage walking? And how did that become such a big and important part of your life?
Yeah, thanks for having me. After I graduated from university in 2001, I knew that I was going to travel for a year. I'd never really left the US outside of Canada, which if you grew up in Seattle is just down the road. So I'd worked throughout my time in university. I'd saved up money, and so this was going to be the big thing. I was going to travel for a year, and after a few months of just sort of generic European backpacking, I realized that I just didn't want more of that, and I spent some time at home over the winter trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Managed to discover the Camino Francés. There wasn't a lot about it, but I found the Confraternity of St. James, and I found the Cicerone guidebook written by Alison Raju. And so I took off. And as I walked it, I wasn't a teacher yet, but I kept thinking, as I looked forward to becoming a teacher, what an incredible experience it would be to take high school students on it. And so 2 years later, so that was 2002, and 2004, I took my first high school group, and I've done it almost every summer since, along with my own individual walks.
Wow, so that gives you a special perspective because not only have you been walking, but you have been unfolding it for students, for high school students as you go.
It's exciting, you know, and it means that even though, and this is true for everyone who walks, you know, that like just because you walk the same route a second time, you know, it's a different pilgrimage. And it's all the more so when you have a completely different group of 8, 9, 10 high schoolers navigating that process.
Yeah. Now, how did you find out about the Camino del Norte first? And how did you decide to walk it and then ultimately to write a guidebook about it?
So I I think I walked the Frances in 2002, then I walked it in 2004 and 2005 and 2006. And so by the end of that, it was kind of like a roller coaster. You've been on a lot. You're just anticipating the turns before you get into them, you know? So the
Yeah.
thrill had worn off a little bit. And so I was looking around, and I had taken students on the Via Francigena in 2005, but that was way early for that route. I mean, it was hard, and I wasn't going to go back to it until it developed a bit further. And
Uh-huh.
so I was looking for an alternative, and it just had always stood out to me, you know, as I looked at the different options, that for me, the Norte was the next logical route to try, because it stayed in Spain, and I wanted to keep using my Spanish. I'm comfortable with the language. And the Via de la Plata, just it's not really going to be viable in the summer for taking high school students. And so
Sure.
when I'm trying a new route, I'm always thinking, like, could I take students on this someday? And you know, look, what's easier to sell to high schoolers beyond pilgrimage, like pilgrimage on the beach, you know? Like it's a pretty nice spot to be. So that was a big thing that drew me in. And then in terms of the guidebook, you know, when I'm preparing for a student pilgrimage, I prepare pretty extensive notes, because I want to be able to describe what we're seeing and talk about some of the larger stories
Uh,
behind it. And of course, I want to know the route with confidence so that I'm not getting us all lost all of the time. And so there was a point where I was just looking at the material I had and looking at the dearth of English language guidebooks, and I thought, I could do this. So I wrote a proposal, and like within a month, Jonathan at Cicerone had written back and signed me up. So it was pretty quick.
okay, and to everybody's benefit. Thanks for doing that. I know it's a big job to write a guidebook and a big job to keep it updated over the years too. And I know you're in like the fifth printing and second edition of it or something like that. So very cool.
It's been great. Yeah.
Well, with no further ado, why don't you go ahead and go into your presentation? And
Sure.
once you're done, we'll begin asking you some questions.
Good deal. So I'll click over to it, and I'll say off the top that my hope for this presentation is to really just lean heavily on the visuals, and that's not great for when this comes out in podcast form. So go find it in YouTube if you're encountering this in that format for the first time. But it's such a stunningly visual route that you just gotta see it to really appreciate it. And so the Camino del Norte, it runs along the very northern coast of Spain. So you can see it picks up in Irun, across the border from Anday in France. And then it passes through a series of some large cities like Bilbao, Santander, Gijón, and then on to Santiago de Compostela. And it's remarkably diverse in terms of the kind of places they sing through. Of course, there are some resort towns that are very popular with seeking sunshine along the coast. But there are, of course, the remarkably preserved medieval villages and a whole end. And then you have some really nice, easier stretches in the middle. And I'll talk through all of that as I go through this. I'll note that the distance listed there, 822 kilometers, 511 miles, it's highly variable because there are a lot of different alternative routes, but that's a ballpark figure. If you were to follow every recommended route that we have in the book, you'd be right around that mark. So I'm going to walk through and just show some visual highlights, but first a quick shot on the history, because I know for a lot of people, when they think of the Camino de Santiago, they think of the Camino Frances. And for a long time, that's all that people know about the Camino. But if you look at where the Camino started, along with Santiago de Compostela, it started in Oviedo. And you can see the most sacred part of the cathedral in Oviedo here, the Camara Santa, which is a pre-Romanesque church. So churches were being built in Oviedo in the 800s, and it connects to the Kingdom of Asturias, which was like the lone holdout as Moors conquered the Iberian Peninsula and the Reconquista started to push back. That all took off from the small town of Covadonga. And you can see Pelayo, who was the leader of that movement, to try to carve out a niche at first and then to push back the Moorish occupation. And Covadonga is pretty close to Oviedo. And Oviedo, a lot of people think of as the starting point for the Primitivo, which we also have in this book. It's the Norte and the Primitivo. But the viewpoint in the church was, if you go to Santiago and you miss Oviedo, where there are some of the most important relics associated with Jesus, then you've really missed the mark. And so there was a call, a command to go through Oviedo. And that means that if you look at the development of pilgrimage to Spain, you have a lot of pilgrims who come along the coast in order to go through Oviedo before they go on to Santiago. And then also, before the Moors had been sufficiently pushed southward, parts of the Camino Frances remained quite dangerous. And so others, in pursuit of safety, would follow the coastal route. And then others still coming from England. I know people think of the Camino Inglés as the place where English pilgrims came in, but many took landfall at Santander and then walked along the coast. So my point is, the historical bona fides for this route are significant. It has been a key route for the Camino de Santiago for as long as the Camino Frances. It passes through 4 autonomous regions in Spain. The first region is the Basque Country. It's quite hilly, it's rugged terrain. A lot of it is gorgeous off-road, like right overlooking the coast, as you can see in this snapshot on the left from the first stage. It also has some significant descents, often following old medieval roads. So it's that descent through woods on cobblestones as you work your way into towns. It has maybe the most beautiful city in Spain, San Sebastian. It has lovely coastal towns like Zumaya on the right. And it passes through the Basque Coast Geopark, which has 60-million-year-old flysch deposits. I mean, it was there with the dinosaurs. So it's just dramatic landscape all the way through the Basque Country. The second autonomous region is Cantabria, and this begins a little ways after Bilbao. And this is where the Norte really flattens out quite a bit. And so you can see one of the very rare hills on the right. That's David from the Canadian Company of Pilgrims working his way up and just powering through it. And on the left, you can see the end of a 5-kilometer walk you can take along the beach from the lovely town of Laredo, and then pick up this ferry. It comes right up onto the sand. You get on board, you cross to Santoña. It's awesome. You can see remarkable Gothic cathedrals like the one in Castro Urdiales. And on the right, you can see this viewpoint when you're walking right along the cliffs en route to Santander, which is the main major city in Cantabria. And Santander is another place that you approach by ferry. It's about a 30-minute boat ride that you pick up, and then you're deposited right in the middle of the city. It's lovely to see it develop in front of you. The third autonomous region is Asturias, and it's not mountainous like the Basque Country was, but it's certainly more rugged. And as you move through it, the hills start to pick up a little bit more. And you will have to make a choice halfway through Asturias, whether you stick with the Norte or you veer southward along the Primitivo. And if you stay on the Norte, you'll pass through Gijón, a large city, and then a lovely town, Avilés, really just a fashionable, beautiful place with a giant park in the middle. And so Avilés is kind of like Llanes in Cantabria, just a lovely artistic place. And once again, you have the opportunity to climb into the hills and also stay near the coast. I love this waymark. It's totally gratuitous. It's unnecessary, but I think someone just wanted to have a waymark in the most beautiful location possible. And you can see the town of Luarca, which is just a perfect little port town snuggled into this little crook in the river, and just a thriving port to be able to hang out in for a night. And finally, you cross a dramatic bridge over a large river into Galicia in the town of Ribadeo. And you will pass here inland. So you leave the coast in Ribadeo, and you'll pass through Mondoñedo, which has a church that has very similar architecture, same architect as the Santiago Cathedral. You'll pass through Santiago de los Monjes, which is a monastery that you can stay in. That's the building on the right. There's an albergue there. And then onward to Santiago de Compostela. So it's a beautiful walk. And while the map down here shows that you follow the Camino del Norte into Arzua, and then you follow the Francés for the last 40 kilometers, there are now alternative approaches that you can take all the way to Lavacoya and miss the Francés almost completely if you want. So you can really stick with the Norte almost all the way to Santiago now. Some notes. A lot of people ask, like, is the waymarking good? The waymarking these days is really good. You'll find older posts where people complain about it, but the consistency is far better these days. The place it gets complicated, and one of the reasons I think a guidebook's important, is because there are so many options. Especially walking along the coast, you will often be in a position where you can follow the yellow arrows on the Pilgrim Road, or you can follow the red and white blazes for a GR, a long distance route that will often hug closer to the coast, adding distance, but often also scenery. And so you can see that here, leaving Irun, you will follow the Norte, and you can see it climbs, and it's a beautiful walk. But you can also follow red and white stripes all the way out this way. You can follow red and white stripes up into the hills. And one of my goals in the book, and Laura's goals as we've worked on this together, is to really try to provide as many of these alternatives as possible so that you know what you're seeing and you can make an informed choice about what's right for you as you go about your pilgrimage. Another common another feature that I think is really important that I've worked on along with Laura over these last versions to the book is adding some significant alternatives and variants. And so one is Santo Toribio de Liébana, which is one of the most important pilgrimage sites in the Catholic world that nobody talks about it, but it's right off the Camino del Norte. And you can't really make it out in this picture, but in this reliquary is what is believed to be the largest single piece surviving of the True Cross. It's just off the Norte. You can walk it in a few days. It's mountainous, it's rugged, it's stunning. There are albergues, and we have that laid out in the book. You can take the pilgrimage to Covadonga, again, to visit the patron saint, Our Lady of Covadonga, who was helped with bringing about this key victory as the Reconquista began. It's accessible off from Villaviciosa, Gijón. And then for some, as we'll talk about in a minute, the Norte is quite strenuous. And so one option is, a lot of pilgrims fly into the Biarritz airport in France. You can just bus over to Bayonne and follow the Voie Littorale, which is the equivalent of the Camino through that part of France. And you can just follow the coast. And so we have that outlined in the book as well. So you could give yourself a couple of very easy days of walking in France, get your legs under you, get past jet lag if you're coming from further afield, and really settle into the walk. So we have those included in the book. Now, as I said before, the opening stage is strenuous. People like to talk about this a lot, that the Norte is more difficult than the Francés. And I agree, it's more difficult than the Francés. And these first 6 stages show you that, yeah, there's a lot of up and down over those first 6 stages. If you look at the elevation, it's never breaking above 500, 550 meters, right? So it's not going up as high as that first day crossing the Route de Napoleon from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. But that persistent up and down, it's tiring. So, you would want to be well prepared to take on the Norte. but I also wouldn't want someone to feel like they can't do it. So there are a lot of places where you can break these stages into shorter distances. So you don't have to go 25 kilometers that first day. You could break it into 15 and 10. And just like on the Francés, there's baggage service. You can send your pack with Correos, the Spanish mail service. So you could, ship your pack through the first 6 days, settle into a rhythm, and wear the pack again when you get to the flatter territory and you feel good about the walk. So there's a lot of ways to manage it, but you can count on the fact that once you weather that initial storm and you get through the first week, the walking becomes easier. And by the way, the price you pay for those strenuous stages, it's worth it. I mean, that opening week on the Norte is just a highlight reel. It's gorgeous. Everyone agrees, I think. I haven't heard anyone complain about what you get to see on the Norte there. Another common complaint and concern is I hear it's all paved. And there is a fair amount of pavement, especially in Cantabria. People point that out a lot. It's better than it used to be. So there have been a lot of efforts made to get it off of pavement. And at the beginning of every chapter, I include on the Norte, Laura includes in her parts on the Primitivo, the percent unpaved. And I've included here the most egregious stage in terms of pavement, right? 99% of stage 12 is paved. And I'm rounding up to that 1%. But here's the thing. If you look at this picture below, note there's no pavement. That's because we've looked and developed this alternative route that follows the coast from Santander. It's a lot longer, but it's gorgeous. You're walking on coastal cliffs all day. There's a lot less pavement. So there are options. And we, again, try to lay those out so that you can circumvent that pavement. Sometimes it means adding more distance, but almost invariably, it means a much lovelier walk. Is it crowded? If you look at the stats from last year, the Norte shows up here, about 5.5% of all pilgrims. So a lot less than the Camino Francés, of course, and significantly fewer than the Portuguese. The Portuguese has really taken off over these last handful of years. So it's not crowded by those numbers. But, when it comes to albergue beds, supply and demand are, it's a challenging relationship. And in the middle of summer, there is definitely some stress on beds, especially in kind of the peak towns that people aim for. And so you want to be strategic there, not unlike what you're told on the Francés. Try to stay in the in-between towns. And know that there are now a lot of private albergues where reservations are possible. So if you're concerned about beds, it's possible to book. I took a group of 13 on the Norte walking through, and we were fine. We planned. So if you're concerned, you can definitely work around it. And there are, of course, tons of other accommodations. I should pause and note there's a significant COVID asterisk on all of this. We're going to see how this shakes out moving forward. Historically, that's the situation. The flip side, some people are concerned when they leave the Francés, there won't be enough of a pilgrimage feel to it. And so one of the things I want to show here, I don't expect you to be able to read the text on the screen, but this was an exercise I did a few months ago. I was wondering, how many donativos are on the Norte? So this isn't a list of albergues. This is just donativo albergues on the Camino del Norte, because those of us who walk know that often there's a pretty great experience waiting for you in donativo albergues. And so just look at the length of that list. There are a lot of options on the Norte. It really has developed. So you can find those experiences and you can plan around a lot of these. The last thing I'll do is just quickly offer a survey of some of the beauty along the way that's non-natural. And so there are 3 different places on the Norte where you can go and see prehistoric cave paintings. On the right, it's Tiro Bustillo near Ribadestea. On the left, it's Cueva del Pindal. You're looking out from it because we can't take pictures inside. But it's one of the detours that we've added as a variant that you can consider on the Norte. As with any route you'd expect through a pilgrim road in Europe, there is, of course, extensive medieval art and architecture. Most notably, I think, is Santillana del Mar in the upper right, but there are many. There is modern art and modern history. You can see the chapel on the left, the sunflower themed chapel in Comillas from Gaudí. And in Guernica, you are passing through one of the sites of the most important historical moments in Spanish history. So there's a lot of that. And then finally, contemporary, you have the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. And you also have a contemporary art center in Avilés that is quite significant. So there's a wealth of art, history, architecture along the way to complement the natural beauty. And I'll shut up there. So I will yield my time, and I look forward to Sandy, your questions, and also questions from the crowd.
Dave, thanks for a great presentation. Wow. As I was looking at your slides, I was thinking when I walked this in 2012, I missed so much. And maybe one of the reasons why I missed so much was because I was using a French guidebook. And my French is pretty old from, 5 years in junior high and high school. So you covered this, but I wonder if we could go back for a second to the question of why should you or should a person stay on the Del Norte as opposed to dipping down to the Primitivo? You mentioned that Oviedo is an important place to go, which you miss obviously on the Del Norte. So when a person is making their choice, what would make them want to stick with the Del Norte?
Yeah. So one thing to note is you can stick with the Norte and go through Oviedo. So you can follow from the split in Via Viciosa. You can, or just after Via Viciosa, you can follow the Primitivo into Oviedo, and then there's an alternative route. There are waymarks. We have it in the book that will take you from Oviedo to Avilés. So you skip Gijón, but you will just continue onward, and it works just fine. And so there are definitely people who do that. And I think that if I were going to stick with the Norte and I'd never been to Oviedo, I would absolutely do that. Okay. If I only had one chance to do this, I would do the Norte and the Primitivo. I would split onto the Primitivo. And the main factor driving that for me is simply like the variety. Because after having been on the coast for a couple weeks, 3 weeks, you can then go into the mountains, and you can go away from areas that sometimes have tourists, and you can be almost entirely away from tourists on the Primitivo because you're passing through these small villages along with Oviedo and Lugo, two major cities. That said,
I was going to say, I've never heard anybody that regretted going on the Primitivo.
It's lovely, and I've had to remind myself multiple times as I prepared for this that I'm not talking about the Primitivo today. So because I love the Primitivo, and if Laura were here and she's sorry she can't be, we'd have to be like really like holding her back from talking about the Primitivo. Okay. She loves it. The thing that I think is really neat about the Norte after the split, it thins out because a lot of people do branch off to follow the Primitivo. So it takes on a new vibe. It's a little bit like continuing on to Finisterre after Santiago, right? There's a change of a vibe. But there's also, you really don't have the tourist towns, the tourist beaches on the Norte after the split. Most of them are before the split. So you're really then following through like small fishing towns, much more modest places. And so there is a significant difference in the feel to it. And there are some really nice places where you still can get hills, like the picture I showed of the waymark overlooking the coast. That's a place where the route splits, and you can stay closer to the coast, or you can go inland. And I mean, that walk up through the hills before Cadavedo, it's marvelous. So so I do think there's a lot to offer there, and you still get hills, some higher elevation when you cut in from Ribadeo. So you still get some of that. And Mondoñedo and Sobrado, the Sobrado albergue experience in the monastery is fabulous. So there's a lot to be said.
That's one of my favorite places, Sobrado dos Montes. That's quite the place with the old church, like a basilica almost, that's deserted.
It's marvelous.
Yeah.
I should add one more thing, just, I feel almost contractually obligated. If people really like the coast, they don't have to leave it in Ribadeo either, because there's the Ruta do Mar, and you could just continue following that. And we've got a guidebook for that, the Inglés and Mar guidebook. And you
Very
could follow
good.
the coast all the way past Ferrol on the Inglés, and then finally cut down to Santiago. So you could be eating seafood the whole way.
Yeah, there you go. So it seems that as I think back to my Camino del Norte in 2012, people said to me when it was raining, they would say, well, there are actually only 2 months to come on this walk. It's July and the other one is August. And then the problem with walking in July and August is all of Spain knows that the same thing is true. And
Yeah.
so you're fighting against tourists who are also there to enjoy this territory in the best 2 months. So is it true there's really a best season and the shoulder seasons are more rainy, that you're sometimes competing with tourists for beds and such?
There certainly is an advantage to being there in the summer. There are albergues, especially in the Basque Country, that are only open in July and August because they're like converted schoolhouses. And of course, if you want to lie on the beach, you don't necessarily want to lie on the beach when it's 55 and foggy. So there's an appeal to that for sure. Lots of people walk in the spring and the fall. And sure, you're going to be taking on some additional rainy days, and mornings are going to be a bit cooler because it's going to take a while for that coastal fog and clouds to burn off. But it opens things up more because for sure the tourists dissipate significantly outside of July and August. So you have a lot more space to maneuver on that front. The pilgrim numbers tail off a bit. And so you have some brilliant open beaches that are yours, right? Like you don't have to share.
Yeah.
If you go in the winter, like make sure you have good rain gear. But I gotta say, it was a couple years ago. I went and I scouted the Mar and the Inglés in December, January. I got rained on like the first day, and it was clear the rest of the time. So I'm not, your mileage may vary. You may get soaked to the skin. But look, waterproof gear these days is great. And if you walk in March, the upside is that like the hotels that stay open, they're charging a lot less because they just don't have a lot of people coming for them. And if you don't want to be around tourists, it's just going to be you and the townspeople. A lot of stuff will close. But if what you want is solitude, if what you want is to have the scenery without the people, you can have that.
Yeah. Well, we'll just think about the fact that you're speaking from the Northwest coast right now, where it's raining almost all the time, including in the summertime. But those are very good and helpful ideas to think about when we think about the weather. So another concern sometimes about the Del Norte is that there is less of a pilgrim identity than there is on some of the other walks. So you're more often with tourists, or when you're in big cities, you kind of blend into the crowd. And
Yep.
maybe fewer landmarks that are sort of Camino oriented. Do you feel that way about the Del Norte?
So I think if you had never been on the Frances and your first pilgrimage was the Norte, it would take you a while to figure it out. It would take you a while to really feel the pilgrimage because, if you start in Irun, if you stay in the albergue, then great. But a lot of people, they book a hotel for their first night because they're worried about not having a bed. So if you stay in a hotel that first night and then you walk to San Sebastian, and San Sebastian, a lot of pilgrims will stay in like the youth hostel at the end of town, but really there's like a huge spread of people across the city where they stay. And then there's some splintering as people stay in different places over the next couple of days. So it really takes like a while on the Norte for you to find your group. I think on the Frances, you find your group sooner. And so if you didn't know what to look for, it would take longer. That said, for those who are experienced pilgrims who know that, like, yeah, I'm going to stay in the albergue in Irun the first night because it's really important to just immediately start meeting a bunch of pilgrims. And then you're going to be very deliberate about trying to build rapport with people as you meet them along the way. You can build that almost as quickly as the Francais. You don't have the variety, but you're going to recognize people a lot more, right? If there's 40 people around you instead of 400, you're going to get to know them faster. And one of the things that I've come to appreciate about the less traveled routes is, on the Francais, if you are an English speaker now, there are lots of English speakers. And there's just a tendency, right, at that gravitational pull that you just go hang out with other English speakers. And so the last time I was there, I found myself just being around a lot more Americans and Canadians. And on the Norte, you hang out with the other pilgrims wherever they're from. So you still get more of that international, I think, experience, or at least I do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think everybody that's walked a pilgrimage has a favorite overnight accommodation. And I think of mine on the Francais and on the Del Norte. Do you have a place in particular that's a don't miss this accommodation kind of place because of the experiences you've had?
So I mean, almost everyone who walks the Norte is going to talk about Güemes. So I'm not going to talk about Güemes. It's appropriately famous. I love Albergue Aves de Paso in Pendueles. Happened to stay there the first time, maybe the first month that Javier was in operation, and we've gone back and stayed multiple times. He's a tremendous host. He prepares your meals, he does the laundry. But I also, I get a different perspective on hospitaleros because I'm bringing in this group of, 8, 9, 10 high schoolers. And they don't always know how to engage with high schoolers. Sometimes they're cool with it, and sometimes it's just kind of annoying. So to give a short story, like this last time, one of our kids was juggling. I don't remember what he was juggling. Javier sees that, comes out with juggling balls and juggles next to him. So they're juggling for a while. And then he pushes the juggling balls onto the kid, Jackson, and Jackson's juggling. And like one of the balls gets away and we're all like scrambling around to find it. We can't find it. We feel terrible. We feel guilty, right? Javier says, no problem. Like the next day, he's not only found the ball, he shipped the balls ahead so that Jackson can have like these good juggling balls to carry with him the rest of the way, right? Like, so it's, he's just an amazingly generous guy. So I love Pendueles.
Do you mind calling your map back up and sharing it on the screen? And maybe you can point out to us approximately where that albergue is. And
Sure.
While you're doing that, I just want to ask to go back to the tarmac question again. And you showed that one stage. I mean, this is what people say a lot about the Del Norte, that there's so much asphalt. But are you saying that it's really mostly in Cantabria or Asturias, and otherwise you wouldn't see as much tarmac?
It's highly variable. So Cantabria is infamous for it. And there have historically been stages there where it's all on pavement. For example, like for a long time, the stage to Llanes was significantly on pavement. And you can still have a lot of pavement on that day if you choose to take those routes. But you can also opt into gravel road and footpaths. So I don't have like a single defining number. You're going to have some pavement heavy days in every region. For example, like the Basque Country, it's great walking. You're on footpaths a ton. But the second stage, there's a good chunk of pavement. So it's variable. There's a bit of a slog in Cantabria that you can avoid if you're willing to do some longer variants. And we lay all of that out in the book so that people know what's out there.
Well, show us with your cursor where that particular albergue is.
Yeah, so Pendueles is just before Llanes. So it's on the way there. And it's marvelous. This is one of those things, right? Like as soon as I go through this exercise with you, I'm immediately feeling guilty because like I think a lot of pilgrims miss Cabo Redondo, which is after Santillana del Mar. They all want to stay in Santillana. Cabo Redondo is like right about here. Fabulous hospitality. And I'll just mention one more, right at the split. between the
Oh,
Norte and the Primitivo. There's a village, Amandi, Albergue La Ferraria. Incredible. Just a beautiful place to stay. Wonderful hosts, often kittens. It's great.
very cool. So a question from one of our viewers is about camping. Have you found that camping is possible, say, in the yards of municipal albergues, so that there are campgrounds enough that a person could either plan to camp in a designated space or do some wild camping?
Yeah, a lot of people interested in camping on the Camino all of a sudden.
Yeah.
It's harder to catch COVID in a tent. So yeah, it's totally possible. So there are albergues where it's possible to camp in the yard. There are a lot of people that I've run into who camp on the Norte in the summer, and they camp on beaches or near beaches. And my experience, there's the law, but there's the practice, right? And the practice is, if you're in an out of the way space, you're not on private property, you like are gone by the next morning, you have a lot of flexibility in where you sleep. And I've seen people sleep in parks in towns too, which always seems a little odd to me, but a lot of people will set up their tent somewhere on the outside of town near a beach and just do that a lot of the way.
Okay. Well, here's a question from a viewer that says, I am 64, but fairly active. I walk with a group in the mountains of the Costa Blanca. I am planning to do the Norte and want to take the Primitivo route when I get there. Is it much more challenging than staying on the Norte?
It's more challenging. I was most recently on the Primitivo 2 summers ago, or I guess last summer, depending on how you think of it, and summer 2019. And I think if you have walked the Norte all the way to the Primitivo, and then you transition to the Primitivo, and things have gone fine for you on the Norte, you will be fine on the Primitivo. Because I think the people who struggle on the Primitivo the most are the ones who are only doing that, right? So you come in and you're into the hills. And the reality is, the first few days of the Primitivo are not so bad. It builds. And so I do think that if you can do the Norte, have no fear. You can do the Primitivo. And if, you got to be the judge of your body, right? Like, I don't tend to think in terms of binary, like, yes, you can, no, you can't. It's always just a question of, like, is this next day a really hard day, a day that you want to split into 2 stages or do in one? Is it a day where maybe this time you ship your pack? I know a lot of people, that's another kind of thing they approach as a binary, right? Like, either you're a pack shipper or you're not a pack shipper. But if you could be tactical about it, if you're worried that like a particularly hard day could set you back for the next week, just ship your pack and come through it healthy, and off you go and you continue to enjoy your pilgrimage.
Very good. So a couple of practical questions that could apply to any Camino right now, but maybe there's a specific Del Norte answer. The first one is about bed bugs. We hear a lot about bed bugs, especially on the Frances, some on the Portuguese. Any special things to think about with the Norte? Any specific problem with the Norte, better or worse?
I mean, I think anywhere you have less traffic, it's going to be better, right? Because ultimately, the more people you have passing through, the greater the risk. I have found myself wondering if COVID will spell the end of bed bugs, at least for a few years, right? Because like albergues, like whatever bed bugs were out there, like circling around the pilgrim roads, like they haven't had a lot to. Yeah, they haven't had a lot to chew on for a while. So maybe like that's like a small silver lining on this, that we're going to have a few years of bed bug amnesty. We'll see. People will talk about putting permethrin on your sleeping bag. I do this podcast on the side, the Camino podcast, and a long time ago, maybe like episode 7, episode 8, I interviewed an expert on bed bugs. And it's worth listening to because he gave some really useful practical advice on like what you can do. Like look at your bed beforehand, look at the seams, make sure like your mattress isn't in contact with the wall. So there are some really like basic things that anyone can do that will help to increase their likelihood of it happening to them. The other thing I'll say is, you know, people are scared of getting bed bugs and like they're a pain. And I was, you know, Laura and I were very nervous for many years about running into them, especially with students. But then eventually we got them. And you know what? It's fine. It's a pain for a day. You got to like run all your clothes through the dryer. You've got stuff you have to do. But in some ways, it's even less annoying than getting slammed by mosquitoes, right? Like if mosquitoes eat you, you're itchy for a week. If bed bugs get you, like maybe you flare up, but they're not. The bites are not as annoying.
Okay. Well, that's enough to make a person feel pretty optimistic. Thanks, Dave. So the second practical question is about shoes or boots or sandals. Any specific suggestions for the Norte in terms of footwear?
Okay, so it's so subjective and it's such a personal choice, right? I mean, you've got to do what's right for you. So I've had people, most of the students I walk with, and for me, I wear just like cross trainers, right? So I wear a lot of Montrails. You know, I've had students wear Solomons a lot. Generally, you know, with 16, 17, 18-year-olds, you're not looking at ankle and knee problems, so they don't need the boots. You know, if you have a history of ankle and knee problems, look at those elevation profiles for the first 6 or 7 days. Do you need that support? Is that going to make a difference? In every group, I have at least one student who, because of blisters or just like the feel, they ditch their shoes and they walk in like chacos the whole way and they're fine. So again, that's like 16-year-old bodies, highly resilient. So that may not be true for all of us. Laura has often walked exclusively in chacos, sandals. So she has a long history of doing that, loves it. So all of them are possible. I think that because the terrain, especially the first week, is rockier, there might be a case for boots. But if you've never hiked in boots, if someone tells you like, well, you got to have boots for the Norte or the Primitivo, don't just blindly follow that. Like buy the boots and wear them on a lot of training hikes, break them in really well. And don't just walk for 5 miles, walk for 15 miles, walk in heat, see how it feels. Because it might sound good in theory and it might feel good on a 3-mile stroll, but like once you get there, it might be a disaster. And that's true of any footwear.
Yeah. So say again, what is your shoe and sock combination that you would use as you walk the Norte?
Yeah, so my preference is Montrails, which are now owned by Columbia, and I just buy like whatever's cheap. So I hardly ever like will go pay full price because good Lord, $120. I've recently, because I've gone through a lot of shoes over the last year because I was walking a lot of miles in the U.S. as well. I've worn Scarpas, which are an Italian brand. I love them. I wore Brooks, the Ghost. It's amazingly comfortable shoe. And we've had a lot of students on trips wear Solomons and had that go well. So those are some brands that I have known success with. In terms of socks, I'm very loyal. I exclusively wear 0.6. It's not a particularly well-known brand, but 0.6 is I've never had a blister. I'm very lucky. I have wonderfully cooperative feet. But what I do is I get 0.6 socks. I buy the smallest size. So my feet are like 8.5, 9. Their smallest size is for size 4 to 6 feet. Pull them on. They fit snugly, but not tight. It's wonderful. So that's my foot care plan.
That sounds like a great combo. And I think everybody that listens to this will like you, but now some are going to be a little bit jealous when you say that you've never had a blister. That's
It's
pretty
weird.
amazing. So this is a question that is common in many caminos, but maybe there's a special answer on the Del Norte. And it's important too. Are many women walking alone on the Camino del Norte? And if they choose to, do you have a sense of whether they would be safe or not?
So I wish Laura were here because she has walked alone on the Norte and the Primitivo multiple times. And I don't want to just sort of tell what she's experienced. I think that, you know, in the broad brushstroke, she's been totally fine. She's never felt unsafe. She's had some like male sexism annoyances and frustrations. And that's, you know, about as bad as it's gotten. I've met and talked to female pilgrims on the Norte de Primitivo, and I think similar experience. What's that?
That have walked alone or were walking
Yep.
alone? Okay.
Yep. And what they report is, you know, is very similar. We know, like, if anybody lives on the APOC Facebook page, the American Pilgrims on Camino, if they the Camino forum, you're gonna see stories of women who experience unsafe conditions. There are the flashers. There is like unwanted physical contact. It happens. So I mean I would encourage anyone to do the reading, but if you look at it in terms of the overall averages and like the likelihood, you know, I'm in the US, you're in the US, like the US is much less safe. And you know, one of the measures you can always take is just get to know your fellow pilgrims, right? Build the network, build the community so that people are around and they're looking out for you. And when you're on the trail, just try to have a sense of like where you are in relation to others on the trail so that you know that like I might be alone here, but I'm pretty sure there's someone a little bit ahead. So if I push really fast, I can catch them. Or there's someone behind and I'm going to find like a safe place, like on a road where there are cars going by, like on the shoulder. And I'm just going to wait until like someone catches up with me that I can walk with, so that if it's ever feeling uncomfortable, that you can get that partnership, that companion.
Mm-hmm. Well, so our time is starting to run out. And I wonder if you would give us, like in a paragraph, the primary reasons for walking the Camino del Norte, what a person can expect, and why you have been and are in love with this great pilgrimage walk.
It's exceptional scenery. I mean, if you look at those pictures and you aren't moved by them, then I can't help you. And there's so much flexibility, so that if you really want to stay as close to the coast as possible, there are ways of making that happen. There is that variety. You can have soft sandy beaches that you're walking on, and you can have high level views in the hills that are strenuous and challenging and get your heart pumping and offer those viewpoints. You still have the pilgrim community of the Francais, just without the overwhelming numbers. And I think that makes it easier to build rapport and build connections if you're, you know, open, if you're looking for that. And if you don't want it, you don't need to have it in your face all the time. Like, you can go there and have solitude. So it offers both of those things. And then the last thing I'll mention is, like, on one hand, it can be annoying walking through tourist areas. On the other, like, I'm a vegetarian. I love being able to get falafel in kebab shops, like, pretty regularly on the Norte. There are other people like who love seafood, and you know, you've got fresh seafood all along the way. If you want ice cream, you know, there's a lot of ice cream shops. So like, you have a lot of creature comforts that are available to you, in addition to like the tortilla and café con leche. So you can have like a pretty nice mix of experiences as you move between small villages with locals and pilgrims and large towns that are thriving and filled with like festive, lively folks.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous. Okay, one last question, zooming out a little bit. What's the next Camino for Dave Whitson? What's your next Camino planned?
Well, so I mean, as you know, I was trying to walk across the U.S. this year, and COVID's got in the way of that. So I did about 2,600 miles here in the U.S. and I wish I could finish that, but I can't. Got to go back to work in the fall. I have plane tickets to go to France for 2 weeks in August if the U.S. is allowed to go anywhere. I felt good about that 3 weeks ago. I feel bad about that now. Whatever happens, happens. But I want to get back to France because I'm working on a Le Puy guidebook for Cicerone, and if I could be walking anywhere in the world for 2 weeks, if it's not the Norte, it's the first 2 weeks of the Le Puy route.
Wow. Okay, good recommendation. Dave, thank you so much for being with us. I think this has been a really helpful recap and overview of the Camino del Norte, and especially a good time to be able to meet you and see your passions, the person that's behind this great Camino del Norte guidebook. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandy.
I'm going to give it back to Amy Hodkin now. Amy, there we go. That's the Norte.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Dave. That's been absolutely fascinating. I've never done a Camino myself, but I'm feeling really quite inspired. Maybe not to do the Norte first, as you outlined, but one of the others. Yeah, no, that was absolutely fascinating. I hope people have really enjoyed that as much as I did. And thank you for answering so many different questions and giving us a real overview. So yeah, thank you both. For the viewers, Sandy will be back next week for another Camino talk. So if you have any questions, you can send those in advance to us to live@cicerone.co.uk and we'll pass them on, or you can ask them live on the event. If you want to find out more about our future events, we will be posting them on Facebook and on the events page of our website, www.cicerone.co.uk/events. You can keep up to date about all things Cicerone by joining the Facebook group Cicerone Connect and signing up to our newsletter. And for Cicerone Camino specific content, please visit Cicerone Camino on Facebook, and also listen to Dave's brilliant Camino podcast, which he's been doing some stuff with Sandy, that as well. So that's really fantastic. So yeah, thank you so much to Dave Whitson and Sandy Brown for spending part of their day with us, sharing tales and brilliant knowledge of the Camino del Norte. And thank you to you for listening and watching and for joining us. Yeah, I really hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully see you in a week's time for more Camino discussion with Sandy Brown in our next Cicerone Tune-In Tuesday.